Aloha, welcome back to Aina Bear Farm. I want to do a video today focusing on a specific plant that's been really useful for me here in the food forest. A lot of you are probably very familiar with this plant, especially if you're in tropics and subtropics where you have warm weather year round. And that is the ground cover perennial peanut. So that's what we're looking at here. That's covering all the ground in between the different trees and plants here. And so even though a lot of you are probably very familiar with it, I'm going to quickly just kind of cover the benefits, the general benefits of this plant. And then I want to just talk about all the different things that I've learned about it as I've used it in various ways and how I've propagated it, and just share with you, all the different things that I've noticed about it. Might help you. So it is a sprawling ground cover plant that is very similar to peanut. So it's in the legume family, but it does not make edible nuts. You can kind of see the rhizomes there. They just crawl across the ground, send down roots. I've noticed that some of the roots can go quite deep, sort of taprooted, and that can be good as long as it's in the place where you want it. If you kind of let it go into places where you don't exactly want it, it can be a little bit of a pain when you're trying to remove it. You think you got it, but part of that root's still down there and it just keeps coming back. Really not that big of a deal though, in most cases, and in a lot of cases it's actually a huge benefit because it goes down and taps into moisture. It doesn't interfere with the shallower roots of some other plants around it, and it does a really good job of smothering out weeds. That is one of my favorite things about it. This was all invasive guinea grass, which I still have a little clump of here. You can kind of see. So we'll dig that out soon and then just let this continue to spread from both directions here. And then once you weed it a few times, it just does a really good job of covering the ground and smothering the weeds. And I'll talk a little bit more about that when I talk about propagation and planting and maintenance. I've definitely noticed that my fruit trees that have perennial peanut as a ground cover around them tend to do a lot better than the same or similar trees that don't have perennial peanut around them. And this is a great example. This is a really nice, happy, healthy black sapote tree. It's been surrounded by perennial peanut for a couple of years now. And, I think just the moisture retention, maybe a little bit of nitrogen fixation in the soil, it just really seems to be a nice partnership with the fruit trees. Same with this coconut over here. It's done so much better than other coconuts I planted at the same time. Very similar conditions, but no perennial peanut around them. And I've got so many examples of that on my farm where I've got the same tree with and without perennial peanut, and the ones with it are just doing so much better. And so even though there's, a lot of other variables involved there, I feel like, I'm getting some pretty good evidence that it has a really nice relationship with all these plants. It also is really cool to mix with other ground covers. So this is a native ground cover that's got that kind of sprawling characteristic. It's called Pohinahina. But the problem with this plant is that on its own, it leaves a lot of gaps, and you get a lot of grass pressure and weeds growing up in it, and it's hard to maintain. But when it's mixed with the perennial peanut, like here you can kind of see these shoots just coming up. The perennial peanut does a great job of suppressing the weed pressure, but allowing the Pohinahina to continue to spread. And I've got a few other examples like that, where I'm using it in conjunction with various ground covers. Works really well. You can see sweet potato here. That works well, except sweet potato can be extremely aggressive and can actually out-compete the perennial peanut and cause a little bit of a problem, over time as you're, continuing to rely on the weed suppression aspect of the perennial peanut. I've noticed that it does great in full sun. It does really probably the best in partial shade. And it does not do well in full shade. So I'm heading into a spot where we're going to see full shade. This area used to have a lot of sun when I first planted the perennial peanut. And as these different trees have gotten bigger in this area, of course, have gotten denser shade. And so these two patches, you can see the edge of one here and the edge of one there, they used to be rapidly growing towards each other. And then when the shade filled in, they just completely stopped. So now I've got this bare patch in the middle, which is fine. The grass pressure under here is really minimal because of all the shade, so I don't really need to mow very much. And as long as the aesthetic doesn't bother you or anything, it really doesn't cause any problems. And I may open up, like this is a Gliricidia that is probably due for some pruning. I may open this up in the future, and then I expect that the perennial peanut will just continue to run through here. And I've got other places like this where the leaf litter from the trees has been so extreme, where that has also really hindered the growth of the perennial peanut. But like I said, it's really good in areas where you're getting at least like dappled sun. And the last thing, just about the general use in the food forest context, is I do have some spots like this that are a little inexplicably difficult to get going. But there's a lot of pest pressure here. And so it's interesting, there's like these kind of pest highways in my food forest. If I zoom in, you can see lots of chew holes in the perennial peanut. And it's just hard for it to really get very established because of that pest pressure, I think. So I've got a few spots like this that aren't as happy as the others. But overall, as a food forest ground cover in the tropics, subtropics, in my opinion, you cannot beat perennial peanut. Here we're looking at perennial peanut used as a ground cover weed suppressant around the patio. And this is long overdue for some pruning. Now, when you're first growing perennial peanut, if you need a lot of plant stock to like continue planting, this is actually really cool because you just come along and trim all this, and a lot of it's already got fine roots on it, and you can just replant all that. Once you have more perennial peanut than you know what to do with, you can just come in here really quick with whatever implement you want. Weed whacker will work if you got strong string on there, because those rhizomes can get pretty tough, especially over time as you keep cutting them. An edger would work great if you just run an edger right through there. This is a really small patio, and so I tend to just do this by hand with a rice knife. Just go down and cut. Takes me like 10 minutes. And then this stuff is great for composting. You do kind of have to worry about if it stays wet, it will reroot. So if that's not something you want, you gotta let it dry out first. But yeah, it's been really cool for patio edging as well. And we've got just some different landscape plants around here, gardenias, camellia, there's a rosemary, but does a good job of just kind of filling in space where you don't want weeds and you don't want grass. You don't want to have to constantly be maintaining all the time. Just needs a little trim. Okay, here I've done something with perennial peanut that if you do some online research, you'll find a lot of people telling you don't ever, ever, ever do this. And that is using it in your garden, in a garden context. And so what I've done here is you can see garden row, footpath, and the perennial peanut is in the footpaths. Now, the reason people say don't ever do it is because as I kind of move to the side here, you can see another garden row. That's all eggplant. A little past its prime at this point, but starting to reflower. But look underneath, that used to be open like this, but the perennial peanut has just completely grown up over it. Now, I knew this was going to happen, and I did not care for a couple of reasons. One is because I'm actually cropping and harvesting perennial peanut because I need a ton of it for my food forest ground cover. And it's super easy to come out here, cut off pieces that already have root on them, and then stick them where I want them in the food forest. So like, I consider all this to be growing between the eggplants here to be a crop of perennial peanut. And so when I need it, I'm going to come in, dig it out, and put that in place in the food forest. Now it does disturb the roots of your vegetables, so it's a timing thing. I'm also going to try to time it when I don't mind so much that I'm disturbing the roots of these eggplants. I mean, these are not perennial, they're not going to last forever. So, just got to look for the right timing of that. In other spots in my garden, it kind of makes sense to just let it run for a while. It is a ground cover. And so like here I've got some Sesbania trees because my garden gets a ton of sun, which in the tropics can be a little much sometimes. So I've got these Sesbania up just for some spindly shade at certain times of the year. So there it actually made sense to me to just let the perennial peanut get established underneath it. And then you can grow things up through perennial peanut like Olena or turmeric, ginger, root crops like that. And they do just fine. The only thing is if you want to have spots where you don't want the perennial peanut to really get established, so like these are my tomato trellises. I don't want perennial peanut under my tomatoes. So you just have to kind of stay on cutting it back. But again, especially if you get them at the right time, when they're green and tender, just come through here with a weed whacker. That totally works. Or if it's a small garden, just come through with some hand tools and cut all that back. Up there you can see what's left of all the roselle crop that we have here. A huge crop this year. We were dehydrating for days. So it's just kind of a weird side story that's kind of cool. You can see like Ethiopian kale popping up amongst the perennial peanut. And so, like I said, there's a lot of people who say do not do this, but it just depends on what you want and how you want to continue to maintain things. To me, this garden's going to have weeds in it. I'd rather it just be perennial peanut, which is fixing nitrogen in the ground. It's keeping the ground covered. It doesn't get really tall. It doesn't really climb on things, although it can if you have the right conditions. It can kind of start to smother some things. But overall, it's a pretty well-behaved plant. And so far, this is working for me. We'll kind of see in the long run. A lot of you are probably looking at this like, that's a garden. It looks like a jungle. But there's a lot of cool stuff in here. There's pigeon pea and cassava. I'm getting ready to plant carrots. And we're in winter where we have the warmth, but we don't have a ton of sunlight. And so it's not a huge garden time of year for me. So this is about as overgrown and chaotic as it gets. But long story short, I do like the perennial peanut in the garden, but you just have to, be aware that it will cover everything and it will do it fast because you've got compost in here, you've got irrigation, you've got all the right conditions to grow it, at its maximum speed and efficiency. Perennial peanut is fantastic for holding onto slopes and hillsides, especially in awkward spots like this is next to my driveway. This was all weeds and guinea grass and like invasive vines and things. And now we've pretty much just got the perennial peanut, and then this is all lilikoi or passion fruit vine. And you can see how vigorous it's like grown up over the wall. It's coming into the driveway. But again, super easy to just chop all that whenever you want to. This section was planted a couple of years ago. It's very thick now, like It's probably at least a foot deep. You can walk through there. You can mow it. You have to be a little careful timing wise when you mow it, because if you mow it during like a really hot dry spell, you may actually kill a lot of it. So wait until it's in a wetter season if that's an issue where you are. But this is kind of cool because I've planted this in sections, and this is kind of a good segue into talking about how we plant the perennial peanut. But what I did was I weed whacked all that guinea grass and weeds down. I tarped it for a couple of months, and then I came in and it was super easy to just dig some trenches and then stick the perennial peanut in. Just cut off pieces of it, stick it in. It can be rooted, it doesn't have to be rooted. You got to water it in for a few days, but it's really easy to get it going. And once it's going, it's pretty much carefree, with the exception of severe drought. It may start to dry out a bit and need a little water. But as I kind of pan this way, this is another section that's more recent, probably less than a year. And so you can see it's kind of not as thick. It is letting a few little weeds in here and there, but you just go through and pull those out. They're usually pretty easy to pull out. It's no big deal. And then as I continue heading down the driveway, this is a very new section, just a few months old. And so you can see a lot more weed pressure in here, all kinds of different things. And, I mean, generally it's not a huge problem to leave all these different weeds in here. It's just that if your goal is like mine, which is really to develop something that is, maintenance-wise, really easy to take care of, then you kind of want to just go down to the monoculture of perennial peanut, because once it's fully established, like that first section I just showed you, you really just don't have to do anything to it. You can leave it. So it's really great for areas of your property where you just need something carefree to cover the ground and something you don't have to maintain. So a little bit about how we grow more perennial peanut. Obviously you need to get something to start with. So find somebody that has a little bit they can share with you, or you see more of it being sold in nurseries and garden stores and things these days, little plugs. But you get started, and then once you've got some material, what I do is I will cut it and I'll set it in some water to soak for a couple weeks, and you get a lot of root growth like that. And these pieces, I've been super lazy. These are way too long to plant, so you can kind of see this is a 5-gallon bucket and it's spilling all the way over. So I'd probably just cut them all off kind of right over the lip of the bucket there. So they're, about 1 to 2 feet long. And then dig a ditch, lay them down laterally in the ditch, cover it up, water it in, water it every couple days for a few weeks, and then you're good. It really doesn't take anything beyond that. If you try to put them in with too much material on like this, it's just too stressful on the plants. They don't have the roots to stand up to the sunlight and the ability to get water to all those different leaves, and they'll tend to just die. There are times, I can actually kind of look down here, where you will notice that you think they're dead, and you just kind of leave them for a little bit and you'll find that they'll come back. So like this is a section that originally didn't do so well, had some pest pressure, and all these ones that are here now popped up much later after I thought they were dead. And so they're kind of mixed in with different plants down here. So, you don't want to be too quick of thinking like, oh, that didn't work, let me start over or dig all that back up. Give them a little time. They're pretty resilient. Okay, this is a really new patch, so you can kind of see the structure of it. I dug these little ditches, little trenches. They don't have to be deep, just a few inches. And these were all plants that had some root on them that I had in water and laid them down sideways. I keep the whatever leaf is on them just poking out at the top, and then come in and water them for a few weeks pretty regularly, unless you're getting a lot of rain. If you can find some cloudy days, click a cloudy patch to do this on, even better. If you have any mulch, like especially like cut grass, and you can just like sprinkle that around the plants to just reduce the heat and the sun intensity, that's going to help them a lot. They just like staying wet for the first few weeks. And there you can see my tarp. So now I tarped this section, now it's planted. Now I'm going to cut that section and tarp it and just kind of move up. But you also, over time, they will spread on their own. It's just a lot slower. But I've had many sections, if I kind of turn this way, where I planted just a few rows and it's spread all the way down the hillside. So I hope that's helpful, even if you already knew a lot about perennial peanut or you've been using it. Maybe you picked up a couple of interesting tidbits there. If you have anything interesting to add, please throw that in the comments section. Or if you have any questions, I'd be happy to follow up on those. And yeah, we appreciate you visiting here at Ina Bear Farm and checking out all of our perennial peanut. Until next time, aloha.